Okay, welcome back. We're still talking about NP complete. Now I'm going to read a phrase here, although it doesn't make too much sense. We can show that all NP solutions can be transformed into the given solution. Or, a better way of describing that is, every given solution is an NP. All right, to make that even more clear, you could say, answers can be checked in polynomial time, right? But all other solutions are harder. In other words, I can check to see if it worked in polynomial time, but there are no other solutions that are available. Okay. So one of those examples is called a Hamilton path. And Hamilton path is kind of sort of like the traveling salesman, not exactly, it's close, where you're trying to make a cycle between items. And so, you know, a Hamilton cycle or a traceable path, whatever. These guys are a scheme, a puzzle on how you can travel on hitting all these nodes and come back, okay? The goal, of course, is to visit every node at least once, okay, and then make it back. So let's talk about some typical examples of an NP problem, because the next chapter is going to talk about how, now we don't have polynomial time solutions to these things I'm getting ready to list, right? But we can do some approximations. And sometimes approximations are pretty good and sometimes they're not, okay? So let's just go through this list of problems that cannot be solved using traditional technique. Okay, here we go. Typically they become in two styles. One of them is called an optimization. That's a very common one, where I'm trying to optimize a route. Right? Okay. Looking for the smallest or the largest, like what's the smallest distance between all these, the traveling salesman problem. The other one is a decision. Well, like, is there a solution given the limits? In other words, can I get between here and there on one tank of gas? Or do the other way around. What is the furthest I can get from point A to in any direction? What is the furthest I can get on one tank of gas? That would be one of those kind of guys. Okay. So, traveling salesman, one more time. This can be viewed as an optimization, right? We want the smallest amount of cost associated with that. And it could be used as a decision because is there a cost below some X, right? I want to be able to visit all these locations in one day. I mean, I don't want to pay the guy overtime, right? So, yeah, it can be viewed at both. So, one more time, why can't I use multiple spanning tree, and how come I can't use shortest path? Because they don't optimize the full thing. They only optimize one segment. Okay, good. Here's a weird one. It's called coloring a map. Some mathematician has figured out, like if you have a map of the United States, it only takes 4 colors to be able to, color each map, okay, each state, so that no two states come together share a color. In other words, any state next to another state that share a border will have a different color. And it only takes 4 colors to pull that off. Wow. How'd you do that? Well, that's an NP problem. Okay, now we know because someone's done it that the answer is 4. But if you had to come up with something similar to that, how would you come up with that? Backpack problem. Okay, so the one way of talking about the backpack problem, there's several ways you can talk about the so-called knapsack problem, is what I usually called it. I need to we're getting ready to leave, and I want to fill the backpack. Backpack has a physical size, right? And I want to fill it with the most important items or the most costly items. And again, we're not talking money here, whatever the importance is. So if I'm going on a hike, I want to make sure I got my tent, my sleeping bag, that kind of stuff. So fill the backpack with the most valuable items. And so here's an item that's very valuable, but it's huge. And here's an item that's very valuable and it's small, but I'm constrained, right? So it's a combination of these things, okay? And then the so-called knapsack problem, where let's say, for example, 3 people are going on a hike, and here's you got a pile of stuff that on the living room floor that you're going to have to take. And there's 3 people with 3 knapsacks, and each knapsack has the same volume, okay, that exactly matches the volume of all the stuff that's on the floor. And your job is to divvy it up so everyone carries the same amount of weight, or as close as possible. So you have a big item over here that weighs 25 pounds, and you got a bunch of little items over here that weigh 1 pound. And you're trying to fix it so that the combination comes out, okay? All right. So those kind of examples are kind of weird. You know, if you're a bag boy at the grocery store and stuff comes down the line, and your job is to put the customer's groceries in the fewest number of bags, okay? There probably is a real, honest-to-God, mathematical way of determining it. The problem is you just don't have the time, right? This stuff's coming off the line. You're just going to have to start shoving them into stacks. So you're gonna try to make it optimal, but you're not really gonna reach the optimal, right? There's no way. You just don't flat have the time. Okay, good. And one more time, the classic example of an NP problem is, cracking a password, where I know how long it's going to take to test each cycle, each guess, but I have no idea how long it's going to take to get this thing done. It might take decades to be able to find it. Okay. So on page 347, they dive into it a little bit more. They talk about what makes something NP. What characteristic is it? Okay, one more time. An NP is a class of problems that can be solved in polynomial time by a non-determinate algorithm. In other words, the solution is in polynomial time, but how long is it going to take to get there is non-deterministic. Hopefully that made sense. So here's a bizarre example. And this is the same example we talked about with how long is it going to take to mow my grass? So in the old days of computing, when you're dealing with the C programming language, there's like 5 or 6 different ways you can do an array. But the simplest array is I allocate a chunk of memory and pass a pointer. Okay, that's the simplest way of doing an array. Okay, great. So I have a function, and your function is to determine the size of the array. Okay, how long is that going to take? Well, I don't know. You're asking me how long it's going to take, but the question you're asking me determines that I have to go there and go to the end. Well, since I don't know how long it is, in fact, that's the question you're asking me. You're asking me how long is the array. Well, since I don't know in advance how long the array is, I can't tell you how long it's going to take to get to the array. Kind of makes sense? So in other words, I don't know how long the array is, so don't ask me how long it's going to take to get there. That would be non-deterministic. Yeah, I know how long it's going to take me to count. I know how that part. But how long is it going to go on? I don't know. Okay? Good. So another example is check to see if an element is smaller than the rest. Now you might think, well, this is deterministic since I know how many. But if you're like, don't know how many, well then finding the largest or the smallest one. Okay, you guys making this sense? So you could say, now this is one of those crazy things that just bear with me for a minute. You could say that the P class problems, the polynomial class problem, are a subset of all NP problems. Okay, so there's this goofy exercise that mathematicians have been banging around for quite some time, and it just has a name called NP versus P. Okay, it's just what it's called. I should have done, yes. So this is one of those mathematician kind of a things. It could be that all NP problems either get categorized as P problems or NP complete problems. In other words, they could be solved in polynomial time, or there's absolutely no way they can be solved. The problem is we just don't know that this part is true. It is possible that sometime in the future we might figure it out. So it's possible that every NP problem could be converted to P. We just don't know how yet. Okay? This is a mathematical argument, and so don't get your head wrapped around it. All right. So, testing possible solutions on page 350. This is the classic example, right? Where you do a non-deterministic guess. I know how long it takes to guess a password. Okay? and then a non-deterministic check to see if it worked, because I don't know how long that's going to take. And it might take 5 minutes, or it could take 10 years. Okay? Okay. Now, so the first part of this chapter was all about Turing machines, and it was supposed to be a mental exercise. And then the rest of it talks about this class of problems that cannot be solved in the traditional way. Now, the next chapter is going to go over that traveling salesman guy and the knapsack problem guy and show you techniques that you can use to approximate it. Because you don't have all day. If it's going to take 8 hours to produce the optimum list for the driver, and the driver only has 6 hours before he has to leave, well, then the optimal solution is not worth anything at all, because the driver is already gone. So the next chapter is going to talk about techniques to approximate these things in reasonable period of time. Now, they're not always right. I mean, they may be off by like 20%. But on the other hand, you don't have a choice. You can't have the guys sitting around and wait. Okay, is this making sense? Whew. I know this was kind of a bizarre philosophical, not much coding involved in this thing, right? All right, cool. I'll see you guys again at the next chapter.